Thank you very much, Kelly. That's great. Thank you for having me today, and welcome everyone to this session. We have a small group, although many signed up. But I know many of the people said that they will be able to watch the recording because they have other commitments already. So thank you for being here. And just a bit of introduction. I am Laila Kasem. I am a senior lecturer in strategic marketing at the University of Worcester. And although my title does talk about marketing, I'm very much interested in refugee issues and business's role in that. I've done some research around refugee entrepreneurship, but more recently about how can businesses support refugees further. And that's really the purpose of today, drawing on my own work, but also on the work of many others and what's really happening in reality from the corporate world. So I will be now sharing my, you should see my slides now. And I moved to PowerPoint, so I will keep an eye on the chat if there's something pops up there. So just some key facts about the world we live in today with regards to refugees. Currently in the world, there's around 18 million people who are forcibly displaced. Okay, not all of them are refugees. Some of them are displaced within their own countries, some of them in neighboring countries, but not recognized as refugees. But 18 million is a very big number, and that's effectively 1% of the world's population is forcibly displaced. They have left their homes, without willing to do so. More than half of these people are internally displaced within their home countries. So we have about 45.7 million who live within their own countries, but not in their homes. They have been forced to leave their homes to somewhere else. 26.3 million are recognized as refugees. And there's about 4 million people who are asylum seekers. Those are people who, applied to become refugees, but are yet to hear, let's say, a decision. And the big problem is 30 to 34 million people of those forcibly displaced are children. So its whole future is effectively devastated if nothing happens. Now, this is just give you an idea about where the refugees are coming from. So this is a recent kind of map from Statista, but the source is from UNHCR, depicting the top 10 origin countries of people who are displaced. And that is for, data from last year, really, or up to last year. And you can see that the top country is unfortunately my home country, which is Syria. 6.5 million people are, displaced from Syria. Then you have Venezuela, which recently came into the attention. So you have about 3.7 million people there. The other one is Afghanistan, which of course the numbers would have now, jumped massively from that figure last year because of the recent crisis in Afghanistan. Sorry, just checking if there's any technical issues. Can I just check with you guys if you are able to kind of follow me on Blackboard? Kelly, is everything clear?
I can see, yeah, it's clear. I can see your presentation.
Oh.
It's fine.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So yes, going back to the slides. So we have these kind of top 3-4 countries, South Sudan as well, and Sudan, both of them major sources, unfortunately, of displaced people. And as you can see, there's a pattern to that, whether it's conflict, in terms of political conflict, but also increasingly driven by other factors as well. Just sorry, checking the chat here. So Victoria, you're saying you can't hear me. I'm not too sure. Could you perhaps, oh, you can't hear me, so I'll try and say, if you could you perhaps re-upload the page? So what are these causes of displacement? Mainly political, yes. There is a conflict perhaps in the region or people not agreeing with what's going on, or parties fighting with each other, but they are really exacerbated by many other factors. Mainly poor economies, lack of employment opportunities, lack of economic growth, all of that kind of drive people to take action, and drive governments to kind of fight with each other as well. Natural disasters and climate change are increasingly becoming a major source of displacement. Some data from 2017 suggested actually that more people have been displaced in 2017 because of climate change as opposed to conflict. So we are increasingly seeing the effect of climate change on poorer lands, less opportunities for agriculture, and as a result, lower employment opportunities, lower growth prospects, and all of that is driving people outside of their living areas and outside of their own homes. So there are many different causes of displacement, and this also kind of quite important for the narrative that we are increasingly seeing in the news, is that, for example, many refugees are leaving to come to Europe, and maybe that is economically driven, etc. And countries in the West are hosting more refugees than anywhere else, and as a fact, this is not really kind of true. So you can see that the top country for hosting displaced populations is Turkey, which is kind of expected given that it is the largest country neighboring Syria, which is a major origin of refugees in recently, let's say. Then you have Colombia, again, the closest to Venezuela. And then you have Germany, which is probably within, is the only kind of developed country. Turkey you may consider a developed economy, although still considered emerging by many. So Germany is the only one Western country listed in the top 5 hosting, let's say, societies. Almost every other one is in the developing world. So the United States, it's coming 6th with nearly over 1 million people, but you can see it's in dark blue. The vast majority of them are in the dark blue color, which reflects asylum seekers. So these people who applied to be recognized as refugees but haven't achieved the status yet. So it's not Europe really by any measure that is the major host of refugees. It's the developing world, mainly countries neighboring those that had conflict, that continue to, let's say, lift the burden, let's say, of refugees or people who are displaced. And 85% actually of the refugees are hosted in developing countries. Now, just some statistics about the UK specifically, because again, to counteract the narrative that we are increasingly hearing in the news that refugees, they are coming to our countries, taking jobs, or we don't want more refugees in here, or they don't have the right to be here, or look how many people are crossing the channel. Well, data suggests that actually refugees in the UK are a very small number. So according to UNHCR, up until end of 2019, there were about 130,000 refugees in the UK. So those are all the recognized people with a refugee status at that point of time, and about 62,000 people who applied for asylum. Let's think about last year up until end of September 2020. So that in that specific year, 31,000 people applied for asylum, and that's across the whole year. But in comparison, Germany, for example, received nearly 150,000 applications, France and Spain about 130, etc. So you can see that as a number of refugees coming to the UK, it's a very, very small number, even in comparison to other Western countries and other countries in Europe. So it's unlike, what we are seeing in the media, where, all these boats coming and crossing the channel. It still remains a very, very small number. Now, just wanted to highlight a key definition or a variation in the definitions, you know, the difference between refugees and asylum seekers and who is actually a refugee. A refugee, to be accepted in the UK, they should have kind of shown, or there's evidence to suggest they have well-founded fear of being prosecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion. And these are words coming from the Geneva Convention on Refugees, which is been agreed by the United Nations, and the UK have signed up to that. There's also a small group of people who have what we call humanitarian protection visas, not fully recognized as refugees, but treated more or less in a very similar fashion. But the difference is with the asylum seeker concept, and those are people who applied to be recognized as refugees, but decisions have not yet been made on their situation. And this is a really major distinction, at least here in the UK, because there's a huge difference in rights between the two groups. For example, refugees are treated by and large in the same fashion as any other British citizen. They have all the same rights, employment, etc. Whereas an asylum seeker has very, very, very limited rights on what they can do or what they can seek, let's say, within the country. Now, you might, I've been presenting lots of figures and facts, and you might say, well, this is really a humanitarian crisis, isn't it? The refugee crisis, all these numbers, all these people have been displaced. It's a humanitarian crisis. So what have business got to do with it? Well, actually, there are many reasons that businesses should get involved. And yes, the first one of them is it's the right thing to do. Businesses should try and support people in need, but there's also really a business case for it. You can argue and develop a business case for why businesses should get involved. Generally, conflict, even if it's happening thousands of miles away from you, is bad for the world economy in the short and long term. So if I take the example of what happened in Syria, yes, Syria is a small country and has a small population relatively, but the conflict that happened there had an impact on the whole region, on the whole Middle East, and we still see it 10 years on. And it did have an impact, a knock-on effect on the other countries, particularly actually in Europe. Conflict is bad for the environment. So any company who's trying to do their bit for the climate change is actually, by reducing conflict or avoiding it, you can further stabilize the world we live in from a climate perspective. Major refugee crisis could have an impact on the local political landscape. So think about, again, back to 2015 and the refugee crisis that happened in Europe. It did have a measurable impact on the politics in Europe. So whether it's, we can definitely see that it had featured in the news here around the Brexit, let's say, discussions and arguments that took place, and it did have a similar effect in Europe. And we can see governments being toppled or voted for based on their views on refugees. So it does have a big impact on even the landscape or the political environment in which businesses operate, even if they are very far away from the center of the conflict. And recently, actually, there has been increasing evidence suggesting that purpose and profitability go in hand. So businesses who try to do their bit for the society, for other human fellows, and for the environment, tend to see an increasing benefits in their bottom lines, let's say. And that is because more and more customers are interested in supporting businesses who go beyond just a business goal to actually do something wider from a corporate social responsibility perspective. So we can say there is a strong business case for why businesses get involved. Now the question becomes is how? How can businesses get involved? And I kind of went through all my repertoire of work over the last few years to highlight 4 key steps or 4 key activities that businesses kind of could think about or choose from, depending on many different considerations. So we can think about crisis preventative measures. social entrepreneurship, corporate activism, and fostering economic integration. I'll be speaking about each of these in turn. So when we talk about crisis preventative actions, these are kind of measures that companies could take to minimize the risk of further conflict or minimize the risk of conflict taking place in the first place. So these could be through stabilizing economies, creating jobs, helping societies or communities co-live together if there is problems with social cohesion. And these particularly in conflict-torn or conflict-prone societies. So what could be done, for example? This includes investing in or buying products, buying inputs for in your supply chain from crisis-affected economies. So some companies, they operate internationally. They, may be able to take some risk in operating in slightly difficult economies, let's say. So they invest directly in there. But an option that is more open to a larger number of companies is sourcing inputs from these kind of economies, or even employment. So if we think about hiring people remotely, COVID forced many businesses to operate on a remote basis. In many cases, there is no reason to just hire people from your own country. You can hire people that are located overseas, and there are many companies or businesses that are trialing with that and finding huge benefits of doing so. It could be that businesses engage in mentoring and supporting other businesses in such economies. And there's a brilliant organization that I've worked with before called BPs, who do just that. They try to support small and medium-sized organizations in conflict-torn or conflict-prone societies. So they work in Guatemala, in Afghanistan, in places like this to actually support businesses that can create jobs. And by creating jobs, you are enabling people to live in a decent way and reducing, as a result, the chances of conflict. And lastly, it's about reducing climate impact. So even if you can't go and do the other measures, by companies trying their best to reduce their own climate impact, reducing their own CO2 emission, they can avoid or help do their bit, let's say, to reduce further displacement. One think tank in Australia suggested that we could possibly be talking about up to 1.2 billion people being displaced because of climate-related events by 2050. And we are talking about many different types of events, whether flooding, whether fire, whether cities being submerged by water. And we are increasingly seeing many hundreds of thousands of people every year now being displaced because of the climate change. Now, the other set of measures is around, or type of action is about social entrepreneurship. And this, of course, maybe not for already established businesses, but for people who are thinking about setting up a business, and they can potentially do so by setting up a social enterprise that is mainly focused on supporting refugees. And we have many examples, that are available. And I've worked with a number of these companies over the last few years. So in the UK, for example, we have ACH, Turn and Breaking Barriers, who work to support refugees in settling in, but particularly focusing on economic integration, so supporting refugees to either set up their own businesses or find employment. And they work on a basis of, as a business really, where they serve their clients who are refugees, but also serving the needs of businesses who are looking, for example, to hire refugees, or supporting creating further jobs and economic progress by supporting refugees themselves into setting up their own businesses. And there are many other examples from around the world. So we have Wintegrade, Startup Refugees, and Forward Inc. in Europe. There's a nice two organizations also, Recoded and NAMA. Recoded focuses on training refugees in coding so they can work remotely, set up businesses, or work in different parts of the world. They operate really on a global basis. And Naman as well is focused on supporting refugees and displaced people to find remote opportunities. And also Startup Without Borders and Jusur, who operate globally. So businesses have been set up to actually support refugees. The third one is corporate activism. And activism, corporate activism, is a special type of corporate social responsibility, which we have started seeing, very recently being more popular. Corporate activism is defined as a company's willingness to take a stand on social, political, economic, and environmental issues to create societal change by influencing the attitudes and behaviors of actors in the institutional environment. In simple terms, it's about doing something and speaking loudly about a certain issue, so you encourage others in your community, in your society, to do the same. And a major example, of course, many of us maybe are familiar with, is Black Lives Matter, when many corporates, took action and stood and said something about it publicly. And we could see that many companies changed their behavior as well. So we can see many adverts, for example, recently depicting more diverse populations compared to a few years before. But this could also extend to refugees. So, for example, in 2017, Starbucks vowed to hire 10,000 refugees across its global operation. But that was a direct reaction to Donald Trump's travel ban on refugees, when he in 2017 said that we will not welcome any more refugees into the United States. And Starbucks CEO came the next day or a few days later saying, actually, we are committing to hiring 10,000 refugees. And that's a strong message to customers, to people working within the organization, but also to the society at large, that we welcome refugees, we recognize the benefits they bring to our economy, and the fact that, refugees is not a choice, really. People don't just leave their countries, they are forced to leaving their countries, and that's a major consideration in this kind of argument. So when corporates take a stance and say, we will welcome them, we will hire them, that sends a very strong message and encourages other businesses, other people to actually also stand up for a cause that they believe in. And lastly is about fostering economic integration. Now, this is a very major concept, and I've recently done some research around this. So integration is a very complicated concept. But if we try and think about what businesses can do, is supporting those people who left their countries. Let's say they ended up in the UK. Many of them have been brought directly by the government into the UK in the resettlement scheme. So these people are restarting their lives literally from zero. They're coming into a new country. Many of them have no connections whatsoever to the society in which they come to live in, and they need to rebuild their lives. So, they can be supported by businesses through two major ways. First, through employment, so hiring these refugees. And again, there are organizations I mentioned earlier, like Breaking Barriers in London, ACH in the West Midlands and the Southwest, who support businesses in finding the right talent for their needs. And there is a major benefit of doing so. So it's not only about, okay, I am being philanthropist, I'm hiring refugees. Actually, many different pieces of research have shown that refugees are very resilient. Refugees are extremely hardworking because they are recognizing this is an opportunity that came to you after being in much hardship through their journeys. So they are very willing to work really hard. They tend to be very loyal, so they stay in employment, and some research has been done to show that they tend to stay longer with their employers. they provide different perspective on issues because their experience is very different to many others around the world, even to the standard immigrant person. What they have been through is a lot harder, a lot different, and they bring that perspective into their business. So some research has been done by Tent Partnership for Refugees. Tent Partnership is a major collaboration between many different businesses around the world. Started a few years ago to actually take proactive action towards supporting refugees. And they found that actually hiring refugee employees bring many benefits to their employers. And particularly in today's world when we are seeing major shortage of staff, everyone knows, for example, the situation in the UK, but also in Europe and the United States at the moment, that there are so many jobs available, very few job applicants at the moment. So tapping into the refugee community could support businesses deal with some of their staff shortages. And again, the companies I've mentioned here, Breaking Barriers and ACH, they did support other businesses finding this employment. And like in any other initiatives where you want to widen participation, it's really about going to where the refugees may be located physically or online and encouraging them to come and apply for your jobs. And what our research have shown is that actually there are many barriers that could stop people, refugees, from engaging successfully, let's say, with economic integration. So many of them, yes, they are resilient and maybe they are strong, but because of the many setbacks they have seen in life already, many had kind of weakened confidence in themselves, particularly if coupled with slightly weaker language. And in many jobs, you see that actually language is not a major, let's say, immediate criterion or immediate necessity for the job. You don't need an excellent level of language. You need to communicate, but maybe not at a very high level of communication. And yet, you see that refugees are put off, let's say, from applying to jobs because of the language barrier. Although again, it's not needed. Maybe it's because of lack of confidence, maybe because they are unable to find the right opportunities for themselves. So here, going back to businesses, it's about increasing their reach to those employees by working with facilitators, let's say, or intermediaries like Breaking Barriers or ACH, or going directly to the community and encouraging people to apply. And the other type of actions that corporates could take to foster economic integration is by supporting refugee entrepreneurs. And again, we see here organizations like ACH or Turn who have kind of facilitated that. So Ben & Jerry is a major example, and I know I can see Amir here. He was in the audience with us, so you might actually talk to us about your experience, because I know you're on Turn program in Manchester. Turn worked with Ben & Jerry to support refugee entrepreneurship and equip entrepreneurs with the skills they need to kind of set up their own businesses. And here the support that can be done is by mentoring refugee entrepreneurs, enabling them, many of people who come to the UK and Europe generally, there has been evidence to suggest they are more entrepreneurial. My own research with my colleague, Dr. Suzanne Mawson, have shown that they have a greater belief in their ability to succeed in business. So they have a greater ability they believe more in themselves and their ability to take the risk and do the business. That's mainly driven by their own experience of the refuge kind of travel, really, from the moment they left their home till the moment they arrived in their host society. That experience had changed them. Many of them became stronger, more resilient, had a greater belief in what they can do. And as a result, they believe in their ability to set up businesses successfully. So but what they lack is an experience in the UK. So supporting these refugees to have some experience, maybe shadowing people in the work, seeing how the job is done, or mentoring them. And many different programs are run in the UK and elsewhere to enable refugee entrepreneurs mentoring. Is one way of doing that. But the other way is when these businesses are set up, bring them into your supply chain, make them, suppliers, or encouraging them, identify the opportunities to become your suppliers. So again, that is an aspect in which, indirectly, let's say, refugee businesses can be supported. So what I've highlighted today is really kind of summing up, is really, the refugee crisis generally in numbers, but very importantly, why businesses should get involved. And I think there's a business case for it, and how businesses could get involved. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. I'm just catching up with the chat. So I can see someone had a problem, so I'm really sorry about the technical issues. And thanks for joining, and hopefully you will be able to watch the recording. But I just wonder if you have any questions or any kind of reflections on what we've said, on what has been said so far. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks very much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. All right. Well, I guess if we don't have any questions, perhaps we can end the session. I'm conscious it's a very busy period for everyone now. End of December tend to be one of the busiest periods. So I just want to thank you guys for being here. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I do hope there was something kind of beneficial coming from it. Thank you, Amir. I appreciate it. And over to you, Kelly.
Thank you very much, Laila. That was great, very interesting. If haven't got any other questions coming through, yeah, we can wrap it up early. I know, yeah, as you say, everyone's got a lot of things going on. I will be sending out the link to the video, so it'll be on YouTube. Hopefully, it should be by the end of the week, and I can send it to you as well, Laila, so you've got a copy of it as well.
Brilliant.
No, thank you very much. Thanks for your time, everyone. I'm glad you've all you've joined the session. Thank you.
Thanks.